when is all this change going to stop? It's never going to stop. What we need to do is get good at change.
I'm going to automate this task in a workflow and this task in a workflow. But that is that race to the bottom. But if you look at a workflow and you think about the constraints rather than the tasks, how can you completely reshape the workflow?
We're at this moment where your chance of being successful is as good as anyone else's, because there really isn't a benefit to seniority anymore. Everybody's back at the same baseline.
All of these things were always true. Now it's crucial. It's the only thing. Welcome back to the Meg and Amy Show. Thank you so much for the support for our show. Please do like and subscribe and add comments. We would love to hear from you and what you'd like to see more of on the show.
Welcome back to the Meg and Amy Show. Amy, you're home. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Back from Nashville. The Nash Trash.
Yeah. Well, I did see the photos on Instagram. Quite a adventure. Amy in a cowboy hat. If you have missed that, you should go check it out. It's really something. I must say, I'm super surprised and very inspired to see Amy Wilson taking the Instagram posting seriously. Go, Amy.
Yeah, I'm a reluctant Instagrammer because I really don't want to give Mark Zuckerberg any money at all whatsoever. So I will sacrifice myself for the good of the show, for my Meg, and have posted a little bit on Instagram. So, and thank you so much. We have over 180 followers on Instagram now.
We are really getting somewhere with this whole thing. Actually, I did want to encourage, please share the podcast. Our LinkedIn is getting very close to 500 followers. And I think we're starting to feel like we're getting an audience to build. So if you know people who should be following the Meg and Amy Show or helping our conversation, please let us know and invite them.
Yeah, and then on YouTube, we're over 120 subscribers, and we've posted over 200 videos on YouTube. So that includes clips and so on.
I think it's also very important that we mention that none of this would have been possible without Madison working her genius behind the scenes. Neither Amy nor Meg have enough creative will together to do all that is required to get all of those clips and all of these videos together. So thank you, Madison, for making us better. We really love you.
And Meg, I understand that there's some show swag that guests have been receiving, as well as some show supporters.
Yes, we have finally gotten our act together and purchased some show swag. We're very excited about it. Exciting to show the Meg and Amy Show shaker bottle. And what's really fun is it says make every day count right underneath the place where you drink. So we're excited for all of you to get on the creatine bandwagon or the protein bandwagon, or just upping your electrolytes with the Meg and Amy Show shaker. Compliments of the design genius of Amy Wilson and Madison Harney.
So speaking of travel, Meg, I know that you've got an upcoming trip, and I was just chatting with my mom, also a show supporter. Hi, Mom. And she was asking me about your trip, and I was having trouble explaining exactly what you would be doing. So I know you're going to Vietnam, and it's kind of workish, but sort of fun-ish. So tell me more about that.
So one of my goals with the last couple years has been to do more travel in Asia. I haven't done much travel in Asia in general, so that's been kind of in my plan. And of course, I went to Cambodia, I went to India, I got to do a lot of really fun travel last year. And this year, I got the opportunity to do a Vietnam trip, and then I'm tacking on a Hong Kong trip. But the Vietnam trip is Jerry Crispin and Chris Haverla are hosting a HR delegation going to Vietnam to talk with business leaders and other industry people about what does it look like, what does work look like, what is the environment of talent development, talent growth, talent acquisition in Vietnam specifically. So I'm, of course, interested in this because of the shift that I see in how globalization is working. And I'm also interested to see what does it feel like to be in an economy that's rapidly growing again, and how does that change the conversation that you might be having about AI or about talent or about jobs or about work. So I think I'll have a lot to learn, of course, and I'm also excited to eat all the food and to experience some sights as well.
There was just an article in the New York Times, I don't know if you saw it, about Vietnam, in fact, and how originally, or, in recent months and years, it was a really good satellite for like the US and Europe, and now it's tending toward a little more towards like Russia and China and so on. So it's a really interesting time for you to kind of suss out what's actually going on.
That's exactly why I'm interested, is to see what is the real on the ground feeling in the area. And of course, when you're there for a short time, you don't really get a sense, but at the same time, I think you do learn something. And I think usually what you learn is not what you think you're going to learn. So look forward to talking about it when I get back.
Have you learned how to say thank you in Vietnamese yet?
Ooh, no, I haven't. That's a good pre-work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm mostly focused right now on clothing that works in really warm and humid weather. All right, Amy, I know we have a big set of topics today. I'm excited to just have a solo episode. We haven't had one together in a while. And today I have been really eager to talk about your transformation framework, to talk a little bit about some of the learnings that you've managed to do, and to get grounded on what collectively we are seeing in this world. So hopefully you're ready for a deep dive interrogation, going the other direction for a change. So I'm trying to remember when you finally published this. It was a few weeks back. Oh,
I think it was August.
Wow, time is going by so fast. All right, so mid-August you published this, but we started talking about this quite a bit before. And I'd like you to just sort of rewind your brain a little bit around when you started to think in terms of a framework versus just a series of indicators and a bit of a kind of where is the world going kind of abstraction. So when did it start to become a framework for you? And how does that work in your brain? Because I'm not really a framework person, so I'm really curious about that.
Well, of course, the whole level setting was being a product advisor to the company Rejig, the work intelligence platform company led by Siobhan Savage, which I started a little over a year ago. And so I learned a lot through that, which is really around being able to understand what work is really happening within an organization and down to the tasks and subtasks even. And then what roles are performing those tasks and where there's redundancies and inefficiencies and so on. And that's interesting in any context, in any world, but it becomes absolutely necessary once you bring AI into the mix, right?
So before you go deep on that, and because I do think that's such an important thing. So this thinking, and certainly all the work that Rejig and Siobhan had done, really kind of germinated out of the skills gap. So well before the world of AI exploding on us and us rethinking so many things. Even before that,
yes,
this idea of understanding how work happens, who does work, what is the work within a job, and where are the skills gaps that are getting in the way of that work productivity, right? So if you think about this is a natural journey for you from the skills work you've done before as well. I can imagine that those like sparks were going on in your head in those early days.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so for my time, at least at SAP, which ended a year and a half ago, as of then, I was still just very much into the idea of like, well, we need to understand the skills and what skills are needed in the future and what skills we don't have and that sort of thing. But what I learned through my work with Rejig was that skills on their own really are meaningless, right? You really need to understand what skills are needed for particular tasks and what tasks are needed to accomplish certain work, right? So that was kind of like the missing piece. And then that becomes even more important when you apply the AI lens on top of it. So that was kind of the basis. And so, really kind of understanding more and more about, okay, well, what tasks are good for AI? What tasks are not so good for AI? Where can we augment humans? Where should humans, take over completely? All of that kind of stuff. So that was a big kind of foundational element. And then two things happened over kind of the May, June, July timeframe. One was that I did a bunch of customer interviews about AI and understanding where organizations were in terms of their AI transformation journeys, what they're looking at. And then the other thing that happened was that you had discovered this very interesting writer, Sangeet Choudary, who wrote a book, Reshuffle, and we had him on the show fairly recently as well. Reading his book and his writing while interviewing all of these customers, I started to, understand what he was talking about as like kind of the next level order. And in fact, one of the provocative things that he said, which kind of piqued my interest, right, was something along the lines of optimizing tasks with AI is, a race to the bottom in terms of inefficiency, or a race to the bottom in terms of efficiency. So yes, you can keep using AI to automate tasks, but if you're just focused on efficiency, then you're just going to keep commoditizing yourself, and it's a race to the bottom. But the provocative statement, which seemed to be completely contrary to what Rejig was all about, was, hey, if you're really just focused on tasks and task intelligence, that's a road to nowhere. So that was the base, right? And so then starting to understand, okay, well, what are the next levels then? Because it's not quite right to just throw all of that away, to say we shouldn't be automating tasks because that's a road to nowhere. I think what it is it's incomplete, right? And so what's next and next and next? And how do we get to those next levels?
And so first off, that entire journey to me has been really both inspiring and eye-opening. I love the fact that this journey for us really unlocked both unlearning and a little bit of this sort of blind spotting. So instead of getting defensive and saying, no, we've kind of figured out the importance of tasks, having that spark curiosity and the desire to dig deeper and to figure out, well, what is our point of view in that thing? And of course, I'm glomming onto your point of view as mine as well, because that's what I do in this process. And I feel like that point that you made about the race to the bottom of task optimization gets to a lot of what people are starting to really internalize right at this moment, which is, hey, the human side of the transformation is always going to be bigger than just the technology side. And the idea of optimizing workflows of today to solve the problems of the future has a intellectual gap between those two things that most people can grasp and say, hey, that's probably going to be a problem. But one of the things that I see in this way that you looked at it, it feels very similar to times in the past where we have seen innovation get to a feature factory problem versus a strategic problem. So to me, I saw a really clear parallel to the times where I have been in product organizations where it becomes a feature war and you can never really win because everybody's in this arms race of, oh, I have one of these and I have one of those and I have one of these and I have one of those. And all of those ideas become kind of disposable, where you build it and it gets thrown out. And the customer starts to feel like you're not actually innovating. And I think that's a similar pattern with this kind of the table stakes are moving so quickly in the world of optimization with AI that if we just keep following this pattern, we're going to create a lot of, wasted capacity along the way because we're going to be focusing on things that aren't strategically unlocking a bigger set of value. So this point that you're bringing about, hey, that there's levels to this model, I feel is bigger than just a traditional walk a stair step. It is actually super important that we keep the end in mind, or we're going to continue to do what we've always done, which is maybe never get past level 2 and be in a situation where we've done everything right through our level 2 and end up being irrelevant or in hurt down the road. So tell me how you're thinking about getting people to jump across that chasm of optimization to strategic transformation.
Yeah, well, so I think there's a couple things. One is there was a revelation from Sangeet's book Reshuffle when he was talking a lot about constraints and bottlenecks and coordination costs. And so what he meant by that was, in a current workflow, you're going to have certain constraints and certain bottlenecks, right? That's just kind of a natural state of things. So you could look at AI with a workflow and you could say, oh, I'm going to automate this task in a workflow and this task in a workflow. And then it speeds up the workflow, sure. But that is, again, kind of that race to the bottom. But if you look at a workflow and you think about the constraints rather than the tasks instead, and you think about, okay, well, does this constraint go away altogether? And like, where are the new constraints? And like, how can you completely reshape the workflow because of the changing of the constraints and the bottlenecks? And where there were coordination costs before, where do those expand? Where could you add value that wasn't needed before, but is needed going forward? So that was a big aha for me, because we were starting to think about workflow, right? Because the first step was really, okay, and how do we automate individual tasks? And then we were starting to think about, okay, well, how do you automate multiple tasks across a workflow? But it's really those constraints that are the key, right? So that was a big part there, right? And then in terms of the customer conversations that I was having, now, by and large, most customers are at like the pre-1 step, honestly, or companies, right? Like it's very, very early days. However, I did, I spoke to Jen Morrow, one of our guests, and, her company Plan Source, where she leads transformation and people. They're doing lots of really interesting things and looking at it like that, right? In terms of, how do we deliver to our customers and how can we do that in very different ways? So that, kind of sparked a little bit of okay, this is a real world example of thinking about removing constraints. So that is a key next step, right? So you're still not like totally an invention and like remaking the world, but it's a different twist. It's a different lens on kind of a more standard process.
I can't help but reflect back to our conversation with John Wookey when he was talking about the need to re-engage with your customers in a way that probably haven't done in a while, right? I think a lot of times when people have been in a successful business, they build a lot of muscle memory around who's the customer, what do they do, and what do they need your product or service to do for them. And I think that we're in an interesting moment where some of those things that used to be true are probably not as true anymore or are shifting in priority. And so I think what you're uncovering in these conversations with customers is that there's a lot to learn in the in-between spaces of how they're looking at their business and how they're looking at what the future might bring to their work. I'm curious if there is a kind of persona that you've seen of the type of person that is good at building that sort of level of first principles abstraction versus just being really good at optimizing the existing business. So being able to see that bigger abstraction of where the new constraints might be is actually quite hard. It requires a different type of skill. Do you have some thoughts about the kind of skill that people should be looking for here?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to some of the conversations that we've had on the show with guests and so on. I'm thinking of Angela Mathon in particular when we were talking about being more of a generalist. So it's always good to have a specialty, but if you over specialize and you keep yourself narrow, it's very difficult to come out of your particular narrow hole, right? So it's good to dabble and be really curious about different parts of the business, different angles of the business, to be able to imagine complexities, different possibilities. And so I think we've talked about this a lot on the show, and that is exactly what you need. You need that curiosity, you need that ability to explore and to seek. This is like a wrap-up show of all of our amazing guests. So
all the things we've learned from all our guests.
Dr. Kirst, yeah, I mean, like all of it goes into this thinking, right? So well done on choosing the guests, Meg.
Well, I think it's collaborative, but yes, I've been really, really pleased with the level of add to our thinking from every single guest we've had. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, but one of the other things that kind of appeared as, thinking about how to approach this is that it's not going to be just one person at the top who figures this out, right? It really does need to be a collaborative process. And so thinking about like the tooling of the future that's really going to help organizations with this maturity curve is the ability to bring people in from different areas of the organization. Preferably each of them has their own curiosity and their own sense of, what others are dealing with. That's going to help a lot. But to actually have, different viewpoints and people collaborating on the invention, not just, it being top-down mandates. And so, the one thing that I would probably add now to this maturity curve and, kind of thinking about it is that grassroots experimentation that's needed as kind of an underlying piece. And so, we've talked a lot about how, top-down training programs to get people to use AI is really not all that useful. And in fact, like most of the grassroots experimentation probably is going to lead to nowhere. But as we saw in our interview with Yamini Rangan, CEO of HubSpot, it's really a very important step in terms of getting everyone's appetites wet, in terms of getting people to feel more personally comfortable with what's happening. Because if you say like, hey, we want to reimagine or invent a new workflow in this area, and we want you to collaborate on it, with all of the fear and uncertainty that's going on out there, the first reaction people might have is like, oh God, am I going to lose my job if I participate in this? So you need people to feel comfortable with like what's possible, and you need them to be curious and to think bigger, right? And in terms of like, yeah, well, maybe I won't have this same job, but I can imagine myself doing something else, right? And that kind of grassroots experimentation and letting the, what did Yamini say? The 1,000 flowers bloom is really important because it gives everyone that freedom and that trust to try things out. And it also does ultimately allow some stems to rise, right? Where you see like certain people, certain experiments like really take off.
I realized as we were talking with Yamini that this is a pattern I've used multiple times, which is throwing something that is not well formed out with the intention of seeing who catches it and who adds to it. And it really helps you identify where the right kind of roles are for the different levels of people's appetite for change and innovation, because you get a really quick way to understand who is rising above and really thriving in this kind of environment and who is shrinking and struggling, and how do you put people in those right spaces. I was reflecting as you were talking against my initial blog from some time back about my belief that the future is interdisciplinary and the need for people from different contexts to help us think differently about the future. But your talk brought me to a new thought, which is we used to, back in the world of work a little bit before my time, it used to be very common for people to do things like job rotations and to, especially on leadership tracks, to be brought to different parts of the business, to sit in different seats and experience different parts of the business. And they still happen sometimes, but much less frequently as people tend to acquire talent from the outside. I think it's a time for us to start to rethink that, because in this kind of a context, there's not really a market for people with AI expertise in redefining your business. But what there are is a lot of people who are probably eager to look at the problem differently and to expand their own ability to contribute to that future. So what I love about your framework is it's really leaning on the collaboration of several as opposed to the genius of one. And I wonder if there's a way to kind of think about that and nudge that more structurally by encouraging people to sit in different seats as part of these types of transitions to help both foster culture, but also to build a little bit of a bias towards people that trying and stepping into new spaces is career beneficial. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that. Yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about with Yamini in terms of, really being able to hire and identify and reward people that are catching that ball and running with it in terms of like AI curiosity and so on. But this would be another dimension to that. You could be really focused on AI stuff as, you're very in your specialty, which is great. That's interesting. And that can really help everyone kind of in your specialty. But as we've learned, that has a very low shelf life, right? Like you automate this one thing, you get everybody else to automate it, and that's great. And then 6 months later, nobody cares anymore because it's commoditized, right? If you can really be thinking about like people that are looking at multiple dimensions and how to apply AI to those, that's great. And maybe before you even get the AI part, you first have these training programs or these development programs or these kind of thought experiments that allow people to sit in different chairs.
I really feel that there's something truly inspiring in this moment of opportunity for the people who are willing to take some risk and put themselves out there. We're at this moment where your chance of being successful is as good as anyone else's, because there really isn't a benefit to seniority anymore. And this is something I felt very acutely at the beginning of my career. I joined a startup. It was in a moment of technology shift. And I could see very clearly that even though I was younger than everybody else in the building, that even the most senior people on this particular wave of technology had only a couple years in. And I felt like this was such a key moment for me, because I was like, hey, I know I learn things quickly. That's something I have going for me. And the space feels like learning quickly will have a lot of payoff. That's exactly the moment we're in again. And I think that anybody that is recognizing that this is an opportunity where everybody's back at the same baseline, this is an opportunity to really outpace what might have been a traditional career path if you are willing to jump in and be both ambitious and willing to take calculated risks to try to get more precise about how you can apply the new way of thinking to growing the business in a way that removes constraints in a more rapid way than before, or even just against a different context than existed in the past.
Yeah. And I think, again, all of these things were already true, right? It was always good to have learning agility. It was always good to know what work was happening. It was always good to have different perspectives to do better as a leader. Like all of these things were always true, but now it's crucial. Like it's the only thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Either
can't
opportunity or
thrive without it.
Yeah.
You're not going to thrive unless, right? Like that is absolutely true.
At least in the context that I can get my head around for where work might be in the next couple of years.
So I had another bit of a revelation, Meg. So you had me publish this article about the product transformation story at SAP SuccessFactors, and how that went, and kind of relating that back to how AI fits into the picture. Obviously AI wasn't part of it at all, but in a nutshell, at SAP SuccessFactors, we were that feature factory, right? The arms race of just delivering the features, when what we really needed to be doing was delivering, integrated value to customers. And so that was a big change, et cetera. And what I shared in that article was that we made huge progress, but it was still tough, right? It's really tough when you have a large product development organization across multiple countries trying to coordinate. And so, one of my revelations since writing that article and, incorporating some of this thinking is like how those coordination costs have changed and how the future could be better, right? So if we think about the product development lifecycle and applying AI to it in kind of this like task-based way, right? You're enabling individual developers to code faster. You're helping, you're augmenting product managers to, write specs, and designers to create design, but it's all like kind of these individual productivity measures, right? But that still wouldn't help you with the major coordination costs, which are like, how do you get teams aligned? How do you get everyone marching to the same drum? How do you get, teams of teams, like the decision tree and all that kind of stuff? And so,
how do you get people to stop doing stuff, even though you've told them several times they're not supposed to be working on that, and yet
right.
That they should
So applying like kind of some of this new thinking that we've learned, what software companies really need to be looking at is those coordination, those big coordination costs and those big constraints, and how does AI change that, and how can you apply AI to overcome that? And I have to say that I have talked to a startup. I'm really kind of excited about, the possibility of kind of turning all of that on its head. So again, it's not just like individual vibe coding, which I'm doing and I'm loving, but but really looking at like, how do you get rid of those other coordination, or how do you add the value of those other coordination costs, which would just be completely killer, thinking about how, going back in time and into our time travel car, and being able to do all the things.
Yeah. So this one is near and dear to my heart, because I do believe that this one isn't linear either. Like, what works for a startup of 50 people, it looks different for a company of 200, and looks wildly different when you have organizations like we had at SuccessFactors, which was like 3,000 people in product engineering. You need different tools for those different levels. And what I love about the journey that we've been on in the discipline of software development and the software development lifecycle is that we started out with waterfall and then moved to agile. And then we really started getting a little bit more curious and a little bit more intellectually interested in the discipline itself. And you started to see things like the Spotify model, and you started to see things like lean startups, et cetera. And I think each one of these were exactly iterations of that, attempting to think about constraints and attempting to optimize for delivery of value all the way through to the customer. And I agree with you completely. I think that the way that it works today is completely broken for the way that it needs to work in the future. And I also think that the shared context and the ability to evolve the context is the missing piece, as well as the tooling and the operational bits, because what I have observed and what you just described is a context shift that struggled to get through the software development lifecycle, both organizationally and in hearts and minds, and in operationally in how product was delivered. So there was a context switch between what customers needed and how we were delivering. And even though we picked apart the pieces, we picked apart the delivery timeframe and the release process, and we picked apart the agile teams and the where to bring people together and where to let them be separate. And we thought about how do we create autonomy within different groups, and how do we organize around the globe, and how do we deal with communication and expectation setting and all of that. We hit a lot of your greatest hits of making change. But the piece that we didn't have, that was really fragile and was really hard to adjust, was to get people to see that different context. It required a lot of human capacity and communication, and a lot of doubt and a lot of work to try to articulate to people, because the context that they understood was so deeply rooted that there was so much evidence that suggested we were wrong and that the current way was better. And so I really think whatever we do with the software development lifecycle, we need to figure out how to leverage this new opportunity to make a more agile context adjustment over time, so that as things evolve, the entire organization can benefit from that learning and that shift over time. Because otherwise, we're going to be in a situation where we optimize and then things change, and then we optimize and then things change. And I really think we're at a moment where AI can help us in letting that context also have some agility as we progress. I don't know how yet, but I really believe that would be the missing piece to make this whole thing valuable. And I think as people are thinking through the tooling, this is the test, the eval test we need to put against those sort of tooling theories, is how do we speed up the agility of what is the business we're going after, what is the context, and where are those pathways to the new value creation that we're starting to observe that we want to capture.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good addition to the maturity model too, right? Or at least, because there's the maturity model, and then there's kind of the like what is the software that enables the maturity transformation. I think that would be an interesting component.
Yeah, I think you're captured in this sort of organizational reinvention, but I think again, the piece that is, always top of mind for me is that this is going to be a looping process. It's not going to be we figure out the new organization model and then we're good.
It's part of the change management, right? Because there's one thing of like, let's get a bunch of people in a room and like come up with some inventions and, and then that's great. But like, how do you actually get people to adopt the new workflow, to buy into the new concept, all of that kind of stuff is such a huge part of it. But allowing for kind of that like shared knowledge, like almost like maybe we just need to like put what are those like chips into people's.
That's right. That's right.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
definitely. Cool. Yeah. A Neuralink of some sort. But I really am. I'm both enthusiastic, but cautious on this particular topic because, again, I see everybody gets it. Everybody gets that like the future is unknowable and that there's a lot of change and that we need to figure out how to adapt. I see people recognizing that the human change management is the thing, right? I'm hearing a lot more of that. But again, I think the piece that I would like to see more of is the realization that culturally we need to be building this kind of change agility ongoing. And figuring out a way to make that less traumatic to the organization, right? That I'll never forget the Amy Wilson standing up in front of a coffee corner, getting asked the question that was asked every single time, which is, when is it going to stop? When is the organization change going to stop? When is all this change going to stop? And I was so proud of you because you said, it's never going to stop. What we need to do is get good at change. And I just think, again, coming back to Amy calls it, we should all listen more. This is a moment where your point is even more true today than it ever was. So I'm really, really excited about this framework, but I'm also, I feel like there's a few pieces of unlock that we owe it to organizations to figure out so that it does not become so jarring and so emotionally fraught for all of the people that we need to come along on this journey. We want it to be a place of enthusiasm and thriving, not a place of fear and scarcity and anxiety all the time. And I really don't feel like there's enough tooling that we're providing to help people find that path.
I do want to call out that that I had posted this maturity framework, and we had lots of people weigh in and add comments, and so I really just so appreciate that. And of course, we'll put that maturity model in the show notes, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And we are in a constant learning mode, as you can tell.
Seekers, man, we're seekers.
So Meg is the ultimate sponge. I'm kind of sponge worthy, but not. Anyway, sponge.
I'm wondering how many people.
Adjacent.
I was going to say, I don't think sponge-worthy is the word we should be using here for anybody that's
Ashton's not going to be happy about that. Anyway, So please, we would love to hear your thoughts. One other person that was very key to all of the thinking that went into all of this, and that was Usman Sheikh, who has written tons about new codes and legacy codes and innovating in the wrong frame.
Yeah, I want to dig on one last point on that because I think that there is a really powerful thread to pull on Usman's focus on how new codes can capture opportunities in different ways. And he has two big points that I really love. And one is around architecture. And he means that in sort of the broadest definition of architecture, the architecture of the business and typically products within the business. But I also feel that I've noticed that both you and I spend probably a heavier proportion of our weight thinking about how do we help existing companies with transformation versus blank sheet of paper new co. And I think that's super interesting and probably unsurprising, because I feel that if we really do want everybody to thrive in work, then we have to figure it out from both angles. We have to figure out what are the brand new things and the brand new businesses that are deserving of growing and thriving as a blank sheet of paper, because there will be those. And then what is the path to help these great, big, storied institutions become and stay relevant against this threat of disruption and these new co's coming in and taking them down? And I'm just curious if you've spent any time, Amy, thinking about that, because for me, it feels very intentional, and I can kind of get my head around why that is. But I'm just curious, was it intentional on your side as well, or did that just sort of happen because those are the people you're talking to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I would say, Usman was and as we discussed in our conversation with him, he's very focused on like how newcos are able to do things differently and what that looks like, and as a result, leaving the legacy cos behind. But because the thousands of customers that I've had over the years are those legacy cos, and those are the people that I've been talking, like I want, back to Yamini's episode, I want them to be promoted. I want them to be the heroes of their story. So what is the hero's journey when it comes to AI if you're at a legacy co? And that's really what I'm trying to lay out with this maturity model and with our show, right, is to provide that pathway. Now, of course, it's still very relevant if you're a leader at a legacy co and you decide, hey, I'm going to go out into the world and do something completely new with a blank sheet of paper. That, bow down to you. That's amazing. This is also a path for that. But the large majority are in a state where they've been a leader at a legacy co, and how are they going to be the hero of this story?
And with that, how lucky are we to be able to talk about all of these nerdy topics with all of these amazing people and to ponder the future?
I know.
I could think of nothing I love more. Well, thank you, Amy, for walking us through your model, and I hope everybody gets a chance to read it. Should we head over to do some leadership cornering?
Yeah, let's do it. I've recently stepped into a broader leadership role, and I'm struggling with managing competing demands from multiple stakeholders: senior leadership, board members, customers, and internal teams. Everyone has different priorities and agendas, and I'm finding it challenging to navigate the politics while staying focused on what's truly right for our customers and business. How do you manage all of these competing stakeholder interests and maintain clarity on what really matters?
This is the big leagues, right? This is the moment of truth of stepping into a bigger role. So I would just remind you that what got you here won't get you there. It is a new job. And it feels to me like there's some key things that you are not letting go of your old job in trying to do your new job. So I would first start there. A couple big ideas here. Number one, when you step into a new role, you need more hiding and thinking time to make sure you're strategically aligned with what is most important. Blocking time on your calendar, probably in the early days, every week. And for sure, as you go on, no matter how long you've been in seat, you still need to be doing this once a month to make sure to look at your calendar, look at the things that you're doing, and ask yourself with all integrity, am I working on the most important things? And am I focused on the right things? You got to get your strategic head straight, or else you're never going to survive, because you're never going to be able to do everything. So you have to be intentional about what you do, because if you don't do that, you're going to be neglecting the things that are the most important. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you're not delegating enough. If you're completely consumed with all of the different things, it is because you're trying to do it all from your own seat. So you need to ask yourself, which of these things are important but need to be done by someone else versus which of these things are important but need to be done by me? You have to remember that as you get to these bigger seats, it's definitionally unsolvable. It's definitionally impossible to keep everybody happy, and it's definitionally impossible to get it all done. So you have to make intentional decisions on which problems you're going to be aware of, but not working on. Even after the delegation, even after the prioritization, there's still going to be an important list of things that are very important that you're just not going to work on. And you have to get to terms with that in your own soul to make sure that you're not missing the most important things. So it really is an impossible job. I totally sympathize with you. I'm not being hard to be hard, but the point of the bigger roles is that your job is to decide which things you let languish and which things you work on. That's your job. And so figuring out how to feel good about those decisions is going to help you a lot.
All right, I'm going to get a little dystopian here for a second. So when you become a manager and you're a frontline manager and you have a team, again, we talked about this, and it is a totally different job and so on. But for the most part, you're really not playing politics. And for the most part, you're going to be able to figure out how you and your team can get pretty much everything done. Maybe not everything, but pretty much, right? And you're generally going to be supported, right? There's not going to be a lot of like internal competition for your job. Generally speaking, everyone around you is going to support you, assuming you're doing a relatively good job, right? As Meg said, when you get up to that next level, you become a manager of managers. You become, maybe a junior executive. You become, a bigger deal. All of that completely changes. Suddenly you have everyone's out to get you. Not everyone, but like kind of, so
True.
it's tough. It's tough out there. And, that combined with what Meg was saying, which is that you can't possibly do all the things and you can't please everyone. So it's like a double bind, right? So you're suddenly in a position where you're accomplishing a lot less compared to what, is seemingly expected of you. And then you have a lot of vultures circling you, right? So it's kind of scary. So again, that's why you really need to get back and make sure that you have a good idea of what it is that matters the most, what your team really, that vision that your team needs to beat to, what things are the most important and aren't important. But on top of that, you also need to have a good idea of when you aren't going to do something, who are you going to displease, and what is the fallout of that? It's important to recognize that and either be okay with it or to have some sort of mitigation in order to make sure that those consequences don't, completely come back to bite you, right? And so this is when people talk about, should I go into leadership? Do I want that for my career? This is why it's tricky, right? It's fantastic to have power and control and influence and all of that kind of stuff. But it's really hard. It's really, really stressful. And so if you really are just doing it for prestige, if you are just doing it for that power and influence and control, then it's a world of hurt. So you kind of have to have this like whole separate heart, which is like why you're doing it. You're doing it because you care about the business, because you care about the people, because you want to, be a good role model. All of these things are really important. And at the same time, you have to protect your heart, which is to understand that you can't care too much, right? You have to care a lot, but at the same time, you have to be able to let things go. You have to be able to recognize that that the politics is going to get really ugly potentially, and you got to just let it go.
It's a little bit like parenting, right? Like there's great bits, and then there's a whole lot of people that tell you everything you're doing wrong.
All those vultures that used to circle to try and take over my child. No, I'm just kidding. They really wanted to take over my child.
Yeah, no, I was more like my children telling me everything that was awful about me.
They were the vultures.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for everyone for watching the show. Please do like and subscribe.
And share.
And share. Yes. Let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.